Okay, well, thank you all for your patience and thank you all for attending this public forum / book launch. I'd like to start the event firstly by doing an acknowledgement of country. This land always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I think it's more than pertinent for us to recall that fact, that it's this land that was stolen in an invasion, land that has never been ceded, as we gather here tonight to talk about the war that's been occurring in Ukraine. As I said, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'd also like to thank Green Left for hosting today's important discussion. Important discussion both because of the nature of the topic and the huge political importance it has. Important because it's launching a new book that Resistance Books, a publishing house linked with Green Left Weekly, has just released. And I'll go into the book a little bit more. But also an important event because I'm noticing just here on the Zoom that we're having people connecting, not just from Australia, but from around the world. I can see that we have comrades from South Africa on here, I believe from Sweden on here, from Barcelona on here, and there's a few others as well, which, hopefully can also contribute into the discussion as well, because this was very much behind the origins of the book. But as I said, Green Left is the host of tonight's meeting. Later on in the night, I'll give people a bit more information about how they can support Green Left, how they can sign up to regularly receive the newspaper. But just wanted to kick off discussion before inviting our speaker, our guest speaker for tonight to talk, just to give people a little bit of an idea of the origins of this book. As I said, tonight's event has a twofold sort of, has two main purposes. The first is to help launch this book here in Sydney. This is really a book that's a collective effort of members of Green Left and of Links International Journal of Socialist Renewal, who, in the wake of Russia's invasion in February last year, realized that we knew very little to nothing about what had been occurring in that region, a region that had proved to be so important. I mean, as actually Sam Wainwright, one of the conveners of the Socialist Alliance, points out in his contribution to the book, only just a few days before the invasion, he'd written an article saying there was no way that this invasion could happen. And so obviously made, and he wasn't, I think, alone in that, but it sort of made us here in Australia think, well, we really need to find out a bit more about exactly what is going on. And so we thought, well, what better place to start than to reach out to leftist, progressive, socialist forces starting in Ukraine. And that's a big chunk of the book. And Vladyslav, who's one of our speakers tonight, features in one of the interviews in there. But we have interviews of a range of other socialists from the organisation Social Movement, which hopefully Vladyslav can give a bit more detail about in his presentation. But we also reached out to trade unionists and environmentalists in Ukraine to get their vision of how the war was affecting those sectors of society. We also reached out to anti-war sectors in Russia, and I think probably one of the, really glad that we were able to include in this collection of interviews was a collective interview that Feminist Anti-War Resistance in Russia did, a feminist organisation formed in the wake of the war and been playing a key role in anti-war organising, and who took the time collectively for their activists to respond, obviously in an anonymous fashion because of the necessity, because of the political situation they face, but to hear their voices. And apart from that, we also were able to reach out then to socialists in the region, starting with Poland and Norway, to other countries in Europe, Germany, England, and then further abroad to the United States and to Australia as well. So while far from being the finished word on the war, I think this book is certainly a central contribution to starting the discussion, a much needed discussion on the left internationally. And I hope that that's what it does become, at least one of the key points of discussion for the left in trying to orientate or reorientate ourselves in the context of not just this war, but what it means more generally for global politics. Of course, as is inevitable, there are always differences and debates. And that book reflects that as well, so that you'll read through the contributions, that there are different viewpoints given on whether it be the question of sanctions on Russia or whether it be exactly what role NATO has or hasn't played in the conflict, but all those debates are fleshed out in there. But certainly what is a common point of agreement amongst those interviewed in this book is a staunch defence of Ukraine's right to self-determination. So I think in that context, and obviously when we get to question and answer, more than happy to answer any questions about the book itself. But I think reality is that probably most of us, or hopefully all of us, are really here to hear from the Ukrainian comrades that are here to speak about their situation. Now, we had advertised that we were going to have two speakers. Dennis was also going to be participating. Unfortunately, the combination of the time difference, which was already a bad factor because he's currently based in the US, would have been a 3 a.m. start. But the fact that then he then found out that his first classes for semester were starting this morning for him time, just made it impossible for him to really be able to participate tonight. However, we still have Vladyslav, a historian who's done a lot of research on Ukraine and Central European history. As I said, a member of social movement in Ukraine, and who's speaking to us from Kyiv on Zoom with us. So hopefully you can all join me in giving him a warm welcome and hand over to Vladyslav.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Thank you for introduction. And I think it's really important that you started this meeting with this disclaimer and notice about stolen indigenous land in Australia. And I think it's really important that we should speak about these points and always bring anti-colonial struggle together in leftist discussions. Without anti-colonial optics, I think left couldn't be strong. It's really a prerequisite for strong left is to work with indigenous nations, with nations that are fighting imperialism, fighting assimilation, trying to defend their communities, and so on. So I think it's a great start. And Ukraine right now is besieged by colonial nations that wants to destroy Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian people, Ukrainian state, and colonize its land, to grab its land for their imperial uses. And now Ukrainians are fighting against this, and already more than 9 years go in this brutal war practically of assimilation and extermination. And now probably Ukraine lives through one of the darkest time in its history, but it still defends. I would say that it is really important to organize real anti-colonial and anti-imperialist solidarity and to connect all the imperialisms, to connect the fight against all the imperialisms and against all the colonialisms in the world. As one famous Ukrainian socialist dissident in the 90s said, that brave resistance of Chechen fighters against Russian imperialism saved Ukraine from the imminent Russian invasion. That quote was already from the 90s, so everyone practically from socialists in Ukraine or dissidents understood that there are imperialist motives, but the struggle of other nations, of other states against Russia, first the Chechen Republic, then Georgia, and their brave resistance, their anti-colonial resistance, gave us some time to prepare. But it's also a factor that all of this struggle connected. One struggle against imperialism can weaken or can weaken other imperialists or strengthen other struggles against imperialism. And I think that is one very important point that we should underline, that we should strengthen all the anti-imperialist movements. We should fight against all the imperialist aggression, and we should create universal points of view against all aggression, against all assimilation. So yeah, that's, I think, very important for the left right now. So we wouldn't degrade to some kind of campus left and withhold our ideas of democracy, socialism, and solidarity. So in Ukraine now, not much really updates happens because most of the things are now usual. We have bombings of major cities from the time, from last, I think, few months. Lviv, Kyiv, Odessa, Chernihiv, Kryvyi Rih, Kharkiv, all were bombed by rocket strikes and practically are bombed every 1 or 2 weeks with a lot of people dying and civil infrastructure destroyed. and terrorist bombings that are precisely targeting the civilians or civilian infrastructure. At the same time, on the front line, Ukrainian army has relative gains and so slowly but pushing Russian forces. But unfortunately, the lack of equipment, the lack of training and professional training that could be provided by Western powers really undermines counteroffensive and makes it harder to push massive Russian defensive lines. Fortunately, last week there was progress around issue of sending Ukraine fighters that could be necessary to destroy Russian defensive lines and to gain air superiority. Actually, right now, frontline doesn't change much, and most of the fightings are very brutal and going on near defensive lines, near minefields, and practically a lot more stale and positional. And most Ukrainian offensive advantage comes from the bombings of Russian supply munitions, Russian infrastructure that is far away from the front lines. In the last time, Ukraine developed its capabilities to strike deep in Russia, including strikes on Moscow, in Crimea, and far away from the front lines on airfields that used to bomb Ukraine. So that's the update on the front line. Unfortunately, it seems that the war will go for a long time, and probably majority of the people in Ukraine would be needed to serve in the army or participate massively in the army effort to succeed against such level of Russian imperialism, such big forces that are attacking Ukraine. I don't think that this war would end swiftly, and we are now practically morally and economically and militarily preparing for a really long fight. On the political front, there are a few progresses. Probably the most important one is the reintroduction of labor inspections and abolishment of some tax cuts for the business. War needs actually now forcing neoliberal politicians to make so-called pragmatic choices and return to at least some form of real economic management and not ideological neoliberal management. In limited form, labor inspections were returned, and tax cuts that were made for the business from the start of the full-scale invasion were backed down and cancelled. This forced some backlash from the business elite, and now in Ukraine society there are a few business campaigns organized by the most egoistical and anti-Ukrainian business parts of Ukrainian society that fights for practical destruction of Ukrainian state and its capabilities. They're agitating for abolishment of taxation of business, of complete privatization of education, of practically ignoring all social role that business should have in times of war. They're also using the media to push their positions and to fight against more pragmatic branches of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian politicians. So right now there's, I would say, conflict between two political factions of Ukrainian government, one of more radical neoliberal and one of pragmatic neoliberal that wants to have a state that is capable to fight in the war at least. And that conflict, it in some ways breaks the society. It divides the society because now there are a lot of conflicts, and take of thesis of limiting taxation really could harm army and Ukrainian capabilities to defend itself. But to promote this campaign, there were unfortunately some criminal actions organized, probably with connections with oligarchs, but it's unknown right now. There was attempt to murder advisor of our finance ministry that is responsible for taxation, and there were campaigns against social activists by the practically paid far right that are serving oligarchic elite right now against practically against the government and against social activists who are fighting for social security and social stability. Last week, some far right activists attacked one left nationalist activist who left Svoboda party, but practically evolutioned to some kind of left-wing position and were practically kicked off nationalist discourse and started to defend working rights, started to defend social causes. And he was attacked by far right in connection with his campaigns for social security. So now business elites practically uses the sections of far right as paid protesters, paid attackers who pressure some sections of civil activists who practically limits the possibility to have extra profits for the most powerful in Ukrainian society. At the same time, there were a lot of corruption scandals, mostly oriented in the army and in the mobilization and conscription centers. Zelensky fired practically all of the people who were heading conscription centers because of blatant corruption and limitation to conscription because of people abusing power. That created a lot of potential for the anti-corruption actions in military and police, and practically paved the way for radical change in how Ukrainian conscription works for the better. Practically, the decision was pushed to remove all the heads of conscription centers and bring soldiers and people connected to the army to administer conscription. People who serve for the front lines and understand how it is important to have fully capable squads with all members. Okay, I see there's sound, unnecessary sound. Can you just off it? Someone turn it me. Okay, great. So it's opens the way to fight corruption in the most important sections, fighting corruption in the military sections and defensive industries. And fortunately, now there is some progress in this direction done by the government. But the same way, municipalities and municipal officials using the war as also pretext for the corruption and illegal dealings, especially construction sector of the business. And there, unfortunately, government does nothing, and all the role of protesting comes from civil activists who are trying to secure municipal democracy and practically secure the cities from dominance of construction companies, to secure green spaces, parks, and public spaces from construction business that wants to destroy them. Unfortunately, the biggest municipalities, the biggest cities are working together with business, with very toxic business that wants to destroy public spaces, and organize campaigns against activists, including the campaigns that use police or special services to pressure activists, to stop their activism. In Kyiv, recently, SBU went with searches for the Union of Architecture Workers, who are now leading the protest against unnecessary constructions in the city. Another development with SBU, actually very positive, that SBU finally announced criminal case against leader of Communist Party, Trosimanenko, who fled Ukraine and now organized pro-Russian campaigns, arguing for more support for Russia and arguing for more genocide against Ukrainians. SBU finally opened criminal case, and in that criminal case, they searched and discovered mention of leader of Communist Party, famous communist mention, and practically requisitioned huge mansion with river, with swimming pool, with a few floors, the typical oligarchic mansion with communist flags on it, and placed the photos of it on the internet, which is really hilarious. But it's a great progress in terms of countering Russian-connected oligarchs, Russian-connected businesses, and Russian-connected politicians that are working against Ukraine. Right now, that case was mostly a formality, but it gave the way to continue investigation in terms of connection of Communist Party to Russian imperialism. And right now, Petro Simonenko, he actively tries to agitate China to support Russia and participates in all of the horrible events together with totalitarian communist parties like Communist Party of China, Cuban Communist Party, to argue for strengthening Russia against Ukraine. Yeah, and probably one of the more recent development, and one that is really horrific, is Russia acknowledged that it's stolen at least 700,000 children from Ukraine, and now they're sent to re-education camps, to camps that are organized by ЧВК Wagner, that promotes ideological education and ideology of Russian imperialism. Practically, this is huge war crime and huge action of genocide against Ukrainian population. And Russian actions on the occupied territories, they're ruining families, they're ruining lives of common people, and they're just destroying the, future and lives of hundreds of thousands of children who are now sent far away in mainland Russia from their homes for re-education. I think that's all with the major Ukrainian political developments. In our work as social movement is Ukrainian socialist organization that fights for working rights, social reconstruction, social stability, and socialism, and of course international solidarity, self-help, and so on. We had a few progresses on our campaigns, and mostly we are now orienting on four things. First, it's campaign against tax cuts, against neoliberal approach to governance, and for strengthening of labor inspections. We have a relative success with labor inspections being reintroduced in some way, and we are already using them in criminal courts in cases when labor rights are threatened. Now we are using these labor inspections to help for our cause, to help to defend the rights of Ukrainian workers, of Ukrainian labor, especially in times of the war. So our campaign for strengthening labor inspections had relative success, but we are not stopping, and we are arguing for complete restoration of activities of labor inspection and actually make it more stronger than before the war, with the necessities of social stability and security and rule of law in times of war being even more important. Together with this, reintroduction of labor inspections helped us in our judicial activities. It meant that defending Ukrainian worker in the court now a lot easier, and we have a possibility to win a lot more cases and to win them faster, and have a lot more strength when it comes to class struggle against business owners who disrespect their workers and does not pay a fair share in times of war. Another very important part of our activities is activities about this discussion of reconstruction. I would say that practically Ukrainian government is the most reactionary actor in the discussions of reconstruction. Usually there is this approach that Western governments try to push neoliberal reforms on Ukraine, but in fact it's the other way around, as Ukrainian government tries to compromise as much as possible neoliberal positions with European Union and USA, because European Union have conditions joining and to Euro integration, which have a lot of social-oriented points, and especially in labor rights, which Ukraine is a lot weaker than general European state. So Ukrainian government tries to negotiate as much as possible attacks on rights of workers with the European Union, but European Union practically protests it and forces in some way to moderate neoliberal demands of Ukraine. The same comes from the US with the Biden administration. Actually, their approach to Ukraine and generally to foreign politics changed in some way. And in terms of Ukraine, it's really progressive change because US government now finances here a few NGOs that are centered around labor rights and labor security. And helping to promote trade unions and trade union participation in the economy. Also, the grants that US administration gives are coming with conditions that they're used together with trade unions and used for social needs. In such way, these actions actually limit Ukrainian possibility to spend the money on the neoliberal demands and forces Ukrainian government to at least listen to trade unions and negotiate with them some of the major spendings of US money. So that's very positive development, but unfortunately, it also comes with Ukrainian government pushing its agenda of neoliberal reconstruction on the conferences, and especially recent conference in London, where practically no one of civil society was invited. This small group of people connected with Ukrainian business and representatives of UK Tory party, they were discussing plans for Ukrainian reconstruction in very neoliberal lights. In such discussions, practically use closed space to create general narratives of neoliberal reconstruction against social reconstructions, and creates a really bad precedent that decisions about reconstruction would be decided in the closed door, not in favor of Ukrainian people. We are in Sotsyalnyi Rukh organized counter-conference in London, and we brought labor members of parliament and our economists from London School of Economy, and our activists, civil society, to bring the discussion around how we can organize social reconstruction oriented on people, on workers, and on everyone involved, on local communities, on practically the people who are suffering the most in terms of war. And that gained a lot of traction. It gave us some support of more mainstream labor member of parliaments, including parts of labor center wing, who are now familiar with quests of Ukrainian social reconstruction and try to support us in this direction. Together with this, we practically the only ones in Ukraine who are pushing the demand of alternative reconstruction oriented on social demands and not neoliberal business demands. So that's practically it with updates. So I think we can go to the question section.
Thank you very much, Vladyslav, for that great talk, a great insight actually into the reality of what's happening in Ukrainian society today. It's, whilst Ukraine is mentioned in the news, it's more often mentioned in passing, in where the reference is really what's happening either in Moscow or Washington or in Brussels, but we never hear about actually what's really happening on the ground in Kyiv and in other cities. And so hopefully this introductory presentation has helped everyone here in the room and online to get a better picture. Much of what, related to what Vladyslav has spoken to in his today in his presentation is included in his interview in the book, which again, it is a book launch, so I will plug it a couple of times, but just what is where he talks about how the war has really helped to revolutionize Ukrainian society and how people who were previously totally uninvolved in politics, by the force of war, being forced to really get involved in changing Ukrainian society. So That also, you mentioned the counter conference in London about Reconstruction, and I know that another social movement comrade, Yulia, was quite involved in that, and also she's interviewed in the book as well, where she talks a bit about that stuff as well, both the economic background to the war, but also the issue of Reconstruction. So we'll put in the chat the link where people can buy it. Obviously, if you're here in the room, the easiest way to do it is just to do it now, but I'll put the link in the chat, or maybe Duncan can do it for, because you can get both the hard copy or the paperback copy, but also a PDF version for those that may prefer to read it online or on their devices. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for questions and answers now. I think probably the best way to do it, noting the fact that as well that we have people in the room but also people on Zoom, is that maybe we take 3 questions at a time, if that's okay with Vladyslav. After those 3 questions and comments, you can answer whichever ones of those may be questions or comments, and then we do another round of 3. And just sort of encourage everyone to keep their contributions to 1 or 2 minutes. There's quite a few people here in the room. There's about a dozen people as well on Zoom. So, I don't know how many people have questions, but if everyone has questions, we won't be able to get through all of them if everyone talks for 5 minutes. So I'm just going to open up the chat so that I can see it, in case anyone is posting questions there, or feel free to, you can either write your questions in the chat, or you can just put your name down so that you'd like to ask a question, and then you can verbally speak to it. Otherwise, if you're in the room here, you're more than welcome to just put your hand up, and I'll just take a list. As I said, we'll go 3 at a time, and then we'll get Vladyslav to answer them. So okay, I can see that the links for the books have been put in, so anyone can check that out in the chat. But let me just see, is there anyone there for in the? Yep, I've got Rachel.
Thanks very much for your contribution and discussion starter. I wanted to know what the state of the anti-war movement is within Russia and Ukraine. I mean, actually mostly Russia, but what's your assessment? You said that, or you implied that the Ukraine forces are holding the front line, but if you could go into a bit more detail on the military situation in Ukraine, but also the anti-war movement itself in Russia. And I haven't had a chance to read the interview with the feminists against the war. Would you be able to fill in the state of organizing of the mothers and the women against the war in Russia itself? And the tensions within the Russian elite around the occupation. Thanks.
I don't have anyone else in the chat, so if anyone else in the room wanted to ask a question, we could do that. Otherwise, if we can let Vladyslav, I mean, there was 3 questions in that one, so maybe I'll let Vladyslav answer those 3 questions then, and then we can go do another round of 3 questions.
Yeah, I think I'm not the person to speak about Russian anti-war movement, but recently there was some development in terms that coup of Prigozhin, failed coup, forced Russian government to strengthen repression against the left and against the nationalists, and practically a lot of great and not so great comrades are now facing repressions and facing threats from Russian authorities even more than from the start of the full-scale invasion. In that, I think it's really important to organize solidarity against all Russian prisoners and political prisoners who are now jailed because of their convictions or because of their opposition to war. Practically, the state of anti-war movement in Russia is that it is really weak, and major positions in Russian society is moderates and pro-war, even more radical pro-war nationalists, and I think repression will harm more this part of radical pro-war people because they give more threat to Russian elite right now. And yeah, practically that's it. With military situation, there's not too much to speak about because progress is not fast. And it's absolutely understandable, and it's actually good that nobody in military makes rash decisions that could backfire. Ukrainian army officials are, I would say, extremely competent and for now doing extremely great job in organizing slow progress on highly defensive Russian front lines. And at the same time, Ukrainian actually military industry developed enough to produce or remodify Soviet weapons or produce new weapons that can strike Russian munition depots that are placed in Russia and 1,000 kilometers from the front line. So that's a huge development that together with Western weapons helps Ukraine to practically right now undermine supplies and weaken Ukrainian defense and then push on these positions on the front line where Russians lack ammunition, training, or supplies. And about feminist anti-war movement, I think the one of the better ones organization in Russian anti-war movements that are really doing a great job and trying to connect even some decolonial voices and feminist and putting feminist perspective on anti-war movement. And I think, yeah, you should read the book. You should buy the book. That's the whole point of today's meeting. So go on, buy the book, read the interview, and I think it would say a lot more than I.
I'll open up then for another round of free questions. I'll note that there is one in the chat, which is asking what is happening in the near future in regards to supporting Ukraine in Australia, which I can perhaps answer after the next round. But I do have Luke here in the room, and then I think there's another question in the chat, but you go for it, Luke.
With the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, are they orientated towards Ukraine or Russia, basically? Yeah.
Okay, and then in the chat we have a question which I'll just quickly read out. It's which has to do with privatization in Ukraine. So it's thanks for the presentation. I'd like to know more about the drive for privatizing state assets of Ukraine from the website privatization.gov.ua. How will this affect the reconstruction process? And what are the debates being discussed, if any, around socialist circles about this? So we've got three questions there. That one, the Russian speakers in Ukraine, and in solidarity in Australia. So I'll let Vladyslav answer the first two, and then I'm happy to address the Australian question.
Yeah, with Russian-speaking Ukrainians, Russian state organized for last 100 years a great effort to Russify Ukrainians, and from the independence, actually to organize some political movements and agents in eastern parts of Ukraine that are pushing pro-Russian imperial narratives and agitating ideas of Russian imperialism. And unfortunately, because of Ukrainian state was weak in its capacities and Ukrainian national liberation movement wasn't united, these activities were absolutely ignored and practically gave Russia complete media dominance on a big part of Ukraine society, which created a lot of imperialist and xenophobic minded ideas popular, unfortunately. But with the full-scale invasion, all of these people and people who were reading Russian propaganda saw the reality of so-called Russian world and saw the reality of Russian imperialism. And practically right now, practically nobody from Russian-speaking Ukrainians, as well as Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians, as well as citizens of Ukraine of non-Ukrainian nationality, including Russians in Ukraine, nobody thinks that Russian imperialism is worth supporting, and practically all of them are either fighting in the army or fighting in other ways to support Ukraine against Russian imperialism, including Russian people in Ukraine for actually participating in battalions. There are two Russian battalions organized, the anarchist Russian fighters in Ukraine who are fighting from Ukrainian side, and people who are fighting in just usual Ukrainian battalions. So I would say that there's no difference between opinions of Russian-speaking Ukrainians and Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians. on the analysis of Russian imperialism and on the need of supporting Ukraine. Privatization, I would say that privatization isn't the most important topic right now, because practically the assets already mismanaged by the government in any way possible, and government actually usually pursues the tactic that to destroy state factories, state equipment, state companies, and to sell them on the cheapest price possible. In that part, we are trying right now to concentrate our efforts not to fight in privatization, but most to fight for social security and guarantees for labor, both in state and private companies. Because a strategy for privatization practically makes government to destroy state companies and destroy state firms, which is really hard to oppose without any parliamentary representation or government power. Unfortunately, in times of war, there was privatization of port, an important port, and there were talks about some small privatizations. But most of the privatization was stopped in the times of war because of that is too dramatic structural change to pursue right now for the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian government. So I would say that privatization right now isn't a major activity of Ukrainian government. And actually, Ukrainian government for right now stopped discussion about privatizing railroads. We had a huge campaign for defending state railroad companies because they were very effective, and they shown in times of war that their effectiveness is huge. And right now, government backed down on privatization of railroads. And other privatizations right now are not as fundamental, and usually government just cut down state assets that are already not working, that already was destroyed by neoliberal management. So the situation with privatization is kind of like that. There's not much to save there. Fortunately, they practically destroyed all nationalized enterprises already. So that's the case.
I think was it that us Jerry was having issues with the sound. Hopefully the sound has been fixed, because I'll try to address his question. But I think in terms of what's happening or what has happened in terms of Ukraine solidarity here in Australia, I think that the unfortunate reality is that it's largely been left to the Ukrainian community alone to do that. Now, obviously, I'm not sure where Jerry is, if Jerry's based here in Sydney or elsewhere, so I can only speak about here. But certainly here in Sydney, the Ukrainian community's been very active, almost organising weekly actions on the weekends outside Sydney Town Hall. And then interspersed with that, they've been organised a variety of different protests targeting different institutions. At one point, they were targeting Amnesty after Amnesty put out that really rotten report, sort of saying, oh, well, Ukrainians were using human shields to protect themselves, things like that, and asking for Amnesty to respond to their criticisms of the report. I know they were also protesting at different times also for the International Olympic Committee as well, because there's been a big discussion about whether Russian athletes should be able to participate in the Paris Olympics. So that's been another issue. And then on top of that, they've been doing a lot of fundraising. So, for instance, tomorrow night they've got a film screening at State Parliament with one of the MPs speaking. The name escapes me now. But yeah, that's right. That's who's speaking there, along with the ambassador, I believe, is also speaking there, showing a documentary or a film about Mariupol. So that's about. I think that might have already been sold out though. So unfortunately, if you're wanting to go, you won't be able to. As well as that, I know that there are some people trying to do fundraising, but within trade unions, to do trade union solidarity. And that's something that's been happening. And perhaps, Vladyslav may have some information, obviously not from Australia, but some of the other campaigns that have been happening internationally of trade union to trade union solidarity as well, which I think, again, is another aspect which comes across in the book, which is another thing that we want to be promoting. It's not just a question of governments, but also how can we, as progressives, unionists, leftists, best help progressive unionist leftists in Ukraine have to deal not just with the war, but with everything that Vladyslav has been talking about as well, the questions of reconstruction, of attacks on labor laws. I mean, that's something that a campaign that we did last year, which unfortunately wasn't completely successful, but in terms of new anti-labor laws that were introduced in Ukraine. So that's another aspect of what's been happening. But I don't want to sort of make it to sound bigger than what it is. That's sort of where it is here at the moment in Australia, as I said, largely driven by the Ukrainian community themselves. So hopefully that answered your question, Jerry, and hopefully you regain sound to have heard that. Otherwise, I'm sure we can get in touch afterwards. I'm just going to check if there's any questions in the chat. Otherwise, there's a couple of hands here in the room. I don't have anyone in the chat, so I'm going to go with Al and then Khalid.
Oh yes, I think the Russian invasion and the reports of what's been happening is terrible. But I think that the anti-war movement here has to consider the continuing NATO and Washington warmongering and refusing to have any negotiation at all. And I think the ideal situation is to recognise that Russia went in without any provocation, but there was incitement by surrounding Russia, encircling Russia by NATO, and violating earlier guarantees to not expand NATO. To me, my question is there any way we can get the anti-war movement to put pressure on our government? This is in the West. Russians don't do this. The enemy of the Russian people is not NATO, and it is not the Ukraine. It is the Russian capitalists, and they're led by Putin. And so they unconditionally should be demanding withdrawal of all troops, of Russian troops. It's very hard for us in the West to say to Russia, withdraw your troops. What we can do is to say to our NATO leaders to make Ukraine militarily neutral, free to join EU, free to economic capitalism. I don't like this, because I'm a socialist. But however, the most important thing is to stop the war. Now, it can't be just a military, to me, it cannot be a military solution. So my question is to you, really is, would you oppose what I'm saying, that the anti-war movement in the West should put pressure on NATO, whilst recognising that Russia is the criminal? Russia was incited in a way. It's like being provoked by somebody stepping on your toe, surrounding you, and then you just going in with your guns and taking their family and killing all their families. It's a terrible murderous thing that the Russians are doing. But politically, we've got to face the facts that to get their defences from under their feet, that is, they're claiming they are, the buzzword is existential, but they've got a survival threat of being encircled, and these people, we should demand a negotiation on the basis with a ceasefire around the question of a militarily neutral Ukraine, and with the Donbass being settled later, but at this time guaranteed, to try to guarantee a Putin to security for Russia, whilst recognising Russia is in violation of the it's war crime.
Caleb?
Actually, I came here like I want to learn more about it, because in all my research and my study, I found like the major enemy for Ukraine is USA. And they create the war, they create all this propaganda, and they are funding the war with billions of dollars. And who's dying from both sides is Ukrainian people. It's like between Russia and America. NATO is like surrounding Russia, and I don't have like anything about NATO just to fight Russia. This is their things, and they want to put Ukraine to be part of this game. Ukrainian people, as we know them, they are not linked with this Russia-America game. Why they been inside and now they are like between big war, and they didn't have a decision. They didn't have any decision made by the Ukraine governments about anything, even to stop the war, to freeze one zone or to fight the other zone. It's all by American officer who decide what to do. So why Ukrainian people believe that like they are doing the war, American doing the war, American fund the war, they are just dying.
I had one more question in the room, and then I'll let Vladyslav respond. Yep.
Oh, it's not a question.
Oh.
It's just a comment about like the absolute failure of the left to show solidarity with Ukraine. Like some of these comments, like it's almost like some people are just blaming the Ukrainians for the war. It's up to Ukraine and it's up to Ukrainians to determine if you believe in self-determination. It's up to Ukrainians to determine you know, what a just settlement looks like for them. And I think it's beholden on all of the left internationally to support the right of self-determination for Ukraine. And anything else is just, you know, falling in line with, you know, one kind of side of imperialism versus another. It's just campus politics. So, yeah, just wanted to make a comment in solidarity with the rights of Ukrainians to self-determination. Thank you.
Can I?
Oh, hang on. I'll
Yeah,
take. I'm not sure.
yeah, let's just answer
Oh, yeah,
because
you go,
it's
yeah,
these
you go, you go.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually love them, and I think it's hilarious to see people on the left who could be, I think, imagined to be with the same thesis. First speaker from Bush and Clinton administration, and second speaker from Trump administration, because their positions are exactly the same. And I don't think that it is correct solution to try to give some kind of Russian Monroe Doctrine, to say that there is Russian backyard of Ukraine and other countries, that Russia have some kind of intrinsic value to decide their politics. It was practically policies of Bush and Clinton administration that unfortunately empowered Russian imperialism. It was the policy that Russia have some kind of sphere of influence, and then the Western world should respect the sphere of influence, even if Russia decide to genocide people there, for example, or interfere in politics. And Russia did it. So practically the absence of actions of international community that were proposed by the first speaker already happened, and they lead to mass genocidal war. So I don't think that repeating such solution would help, and that we should repeat US imperialist statements that there should be some compromise between Russian and US imperialism to force Ukraine to neutrality, or force Ukraine to cede its part of territory in the Donbas region, to cede people. I think it's not the position on the left. And I think we shouldn't take this position. We shouldn't try to negotiate lives of millions of people for some imperialist interests. I don't think that it is acceptable position for the left. Yeah, and thesis that NATO expansion provoked Russia is possible only if you think that Russian demands to have sphere of influence to Ukrainian people and to control Ukrainian politics is legitimate. But I don't think that it is legitimate, that Ukrainian people have their rights to decide their politics. And that fact, this absurd take that Russia somehow threatened, and so it does genocide, I don't know how it could be possibly structural in any way justified, because when you feel threatened, you don't steal 700,000 children from the country that so-called threatens you to send them to the education camp. You don't organize genocide, you don't destroy the whole nations, and you don't promote the politics that you say that we want to next to go to Poland and to Georgia and annex them. And yeah, it's not very defensive politics. It's not the politics that are done by the countries who feel provoked and feel the need to defend itself, especially defending itself, bombing Kyiv, where I live. I don't think it's a good defensive strategy, I would say, to bomb countries that demilitarize, that have different security guarantees with Russia, signed in Budapest Memorandum that guaranteed non-interference and guaranteed that Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine demilitarizing and giving its nuclear weapons to Russia. So practically breaking all international law, organizing genocide and imperialist conquest isn't justifiable by some kind of theory of Russian Monroe Doctrine in Europe. And I don't think that Lev should buy in it. Also, the second part is even more radical in terms of more imperialist that says that there is no such thing as Ukrainian agency, that there is a fight between Russia and America, which kind of very Eurocentric, very like white man view that just ignores the existence of other nations, other agencies, and ignores the logic of Russian imperialism that practically from 90s, Russian imperialism assimilated all Ukrainian diaspora, closed all Ukrainian schools in Russia, and on their main state universities, they agitate for ideas that there is no Ukrainian nation, that it does not exist, that it was created, that Ukrainian nation was created by the West to undermine Russia. When state in 90s and further organized such actions of cultural genocide and militaristic propaganda, it doesn't mean that it feels threatened. It means that it is promoting and preparing its own genocide conquests, and that it is creating the ground for imperialist ambitions and national assimilation. So you cannot possibly explain such things and such actions of Russian imperialism, as well as actions in Chechnya, with the argument that Russia feels threatened. Maybe ideals of Russian imperialist dominance were threatened, but I think it's good when they're threatened. There shouldn't be empires. So I think that's the answer on that question. And actually, in the book, I think there's an article about NATO expansion and history of that myth, or at least it published on Green Left, which is called "Not one inch further," at least if it's not for Vladivostok. It's the article that discusses mythology of so-called NATO expansion and why it is just complete propagandist take that have no relations to reality. And also, I think it's very important to think in this context about Russian and US cooperation, first to undermine Ukrainian sovereignty, done by, well, nearly all US administrations, US and UK cooperation against Chechen freedom fighters and against Chechen Republic, that was painted as war on terror and forced with extreme Islamophobia, and support for Putin from Blair and from US administration at the time. All this connection actually paints the picture that Russia and US cooperated greatly, and only when Russia organized its third invasion, actually fourth even, the international community and pressure of ordinary people to the governments actually forced the US and other countries to just reiterate their imperialist policies and actually show progressive support to Ukrainians. So yeah, I think that's it with this question, and I hope there will be no more questions like this. So let's continue.
I'll take another round. Just to add two things. Just the article that Vladyslav was referring to is an article by Carl Mira. It's not in the book, but it is on the Links website. So I'm sure if you just either look up Carl with a C, Mira, perhaps maybe even Duncan, if you can put the link in the chat, so whoever's interested can read that. Having said that, there is discussion in the book about these questions of NATO expansionism, negotiations that addressed by comrades in Ukraine. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was one of the questions we talked about in our interview, Vladyslav, certainly the question of negotiations and how Ukrainians felt about that, but also with people in Russia and in Europe as well. So that's all, hopefully part of the discussion there as well. Sorry, there was a couple of hands that came up in the room. I've got 1 and 2 in the room, and let me just check that I haven't missed anyone in the chat. Otherwise, we'll start with those two in the room, and I'll have a look in the chat.
Yeah, thanks for your speech. And my question is about what is the attitude in Ukrainian society to these questions of European institutions and NATO, and are there nuances to it? Because I can imagine the context. There's overwhelming first thing is get Russia out, and if they can get help from NATO, if they can get help from European powers, they will obviously take that, and that is an entirely understandable position. And I really ask that because I think that is the key question. It's not to NATO to determine Ukraine's security. It's up to the Ukrainian people to determine it. And that's what this war is about. And I think often, I'm going to make a very brief point, but often I think on the left, we look up all the time. We're always looking up. Well, the rulers here don't look at ordinary people. The Ukrainians are not simply dying, they are fighting. And that's the crucial point. They're fighting. And they're not fighting for NATO, they're fighting for themselves. So I'm interested in what those people themselves think about all those things, whether or not we in this room or around the world will agree with them 100%. What do they actually think about these things?
Another question here.
Yeah, I just had a question. Here's my question. My question is, why didn't Ukraine simply implement the Minsk Accords and promise not to join NATO? And there wouldn't have been a problem.
Yes.
You're like, maybe I'm missing something, but
I don't have any other questions in the room or the chat. So, and they were two pretty big questions anyway. So maybe Vladyslav, do you want to answer those? And Vladislav's already put the link for the article on the chat, so no need to worry about that now.
Yeah, starting with Minsk Accords. Well, first thing that agreements that are forced by force and invasion and wars are not legitimate by international law. It's the first, because they are forced by the military action and occupation. Minsk agreement was practically the agreement that was used by Russian imperialism as the justification to continue its action in Ukraine. And Ukraine actually tried to implement it as far as possible, tried to negotiate it, even went with a good faith to the imperialist agreement, thinking that Russia would respect it. It was, of course, dire mistake that Ukraine just trusted Russian imperialism. And in fact, in 2022, Russian side, after years of obstructing implementation of Minsk agreements, just decided to cancel them. And a few months later, one of the architect and writer of Minsk agreements, Surkov, said that they never were planned to be implemented. They were planned to just pressure Ukraine, and they were planned to just help Russia to promote their interests. It's interview from Russian officials that was working on Minsk negotiation, Minsk agreements, saying that they never were planned for implementing. It was just practically some kind of casus belli for Russia to just even strengthen its imperialism, firstly to legitimize their illegal and brutal occupation of Ukrainian regions in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, as well as Crimea, and second, to give Russia time and international pressure and international help in some way to prepare for the full-scale invasion that was planned all along. And as we can see from the also interviews from Russian officials who participated in creation of so-called Novorossiya, Russian occupying zone in eastern Ukraine that was absolutely forced by military forces, they're saying that they wanted to go further, and the plan was to occupy whole Ukraine. And practically, from what I see also, Russia always planned to invade Ukraine, either to invade or to just make it puppet like the situation is Belarus. And implementation of Minsk agreements were actually pushed by Ukrainian government, and they did most of the closest, but they were obstructed by Russian forces. And in the end, it didn't matter, because the interest of Russian imperialists was to annex Ukraine and destroy Ukrainian identity, destroy Ukrainian people. There is nothing to negotiate about this. There's no compromise between destroy Ukrainian people and Ukrainian sovereignty and have free democratic Ukraine. There's no middle point in this. So no possibility for negotiation was there. Okay, another question about European institution in NATO. I think I said this in an interview that Ukrainians really love and hate NATO. Hate NATO because support with NATO was very passive, and Ukrainians always needed to force NATO to give at least something. And NATO was always trying to compromise with Russia, trying to work with Russia, not Ukraine. And I think even before the full-scale invasion, Biden said that if Russia will organize small-scale invasion, US won't sanction them. So that was the approach of NATO, and Ukrainians really feel betrayed by the Western actions, that their ignorance of Russian imperialism, their tolerance to Putin, and their wish of dealing with Russia and not Ukraine. But with the war, support of NATO, however forced it wasn't, because like Ukrainians really demanded everything so hard and getting it with a lot of delays, and every delay of weapon supplies means more deaths. It means that people will die. It means that war will drag for longer. A lot more lives would be broken. A lot more families killed. So Ukrainians were extremely critical of delays, extremely critical of passivity, but also there is no other power that supports Ukraine militarily as much, and helps Ukraine to gain its independence as NATO. So we don't have much to choose. We of course criticizing them for such geopolitical thinking and lack of real solidarity and real support in terms of weapon deliveries and diplomatic help. But at the same time, the support that was given is very appreciated, and we understand that probably without these NATO weapons, millions would die. So especially, I think without anti-air support, I wouldn't be speaking with you. With the amount of rockets fired this summer on Kyiv being like 200, the city would be just destroyed. So, and because we have American supplied anti-air systems, I now can speak with you, and I have all my family still, fortunately, living and not lying in the graveyard. So because of this, we are really appreciating the help of NATO countries. At the same time, pursuing to join NATO become as a guarantee of Ukrainian independence and guarantees that something like this would never happen again. And majority of Ukrainians, including our organization, supports Ukrainian integration in NATO alliance. And practically, we think that security guarantees is very important for the left, because person who don't feel secure in terms of being invaded, striking with rockets, who cannot feel secure about his life, cannot think creatively about introducing progressive reforms and socialism. The same attitude to European institutions. We are very critical of them. We are very critical of their passivities, of their corruption, bureaucracy, and their big power thinking. But at the same time, we are thinking that we will join and try to change them. We want to participate in regional politics, and we don't want to be excluded. We don't want to be this border region between Russia and Europe, but we want actually to participate in decision-making of European Parliament, European Commissions, and we want to be a part of this. And actually, European integration provides Ukraine with very important clauses to defend its labor rights, to defend its social rights, because now nothing stops Ukrainian government to just ignore agreements that were taken with International Labour Organization, and they want to just strike down them and create like super neoliberal country. But demands of European integration just don't allow this. They force Ukraine to follow every bit of International Labour Organization agreements, and actually to push for more comprehensive labor market securities. So in some way, it is also a positive thing of European integration. But at the same time, we are trying to propose and to push together with other European left parties, especially together with Razem party in Poland, with Lewica, with different European socialist forces, idea of alternative Europe, of Europe that would defend its worker, that wouldn't promote different big power politics and wouldn't play a role of imperialist countries, but actually secure welfare for their people. So I think that answers the question about attitude to European institutions in NATO. And the majority of the people also see integration to Europe as some kind of guarantee that Ukraine won't go authoritarian way. I think it's elusive because countries that participate in European integration, like Hungary, perfectly fine pursuing authoritarian path. But there's also this identity thing that Europe associated with democracy and human rights, even if it's not real, it's the ideas that Ukrainians have. And when Ukraine is speaking about European integration, they also speaking about democratization of their society. So I think that's it.
Thank you for those responses. Just again, to raise the book, the question about the Minsk Accords, there's in the book, in the appendix, there's an article written by Daria, another Ukrainian socialist and member of social movement, although based in France, if I recall correctly, where she traces quite a bit of the history, basically from Maidan from 2014 to the invasion, including the Minsk Accords and what they meant, and how they were or weren't implemented. The other question she takes up in that contribution is the role of the far right in Ukraine, which again is something that Vladyslav mentioned in his talk a bit, and it's certainly a common issue that comes up in discussion. So the book helps to try to, as I said, if not answer all the questions, at least provide some more information and some more food for thought as part of the discussion. I think I saw a couple of hands go up, but I might have been mistaken. But I just to check if there's anyone else in the room that wanted to ask any questions. I've got 1 and 2, and then so I've got 2 in the room. And let me just see if there's anyone on the chat. Otherwise, we'll go with the two questions in the room. Okay, so we've got the 2. So we'll go. Yep.
Oh, thanks very much, Vladyslav, for your talk. And it's, we're a long way away on the other side of the world, and to appreciate what, the struggle that's going on over there is something really important. I just want to say that the position that the Socialist Alliance adopted early in the piece is shown by the placard right behind Fred's head there, which was Russia out of Ukraine and no to NATO and no war in Ukraine. So it's sort of like two sides of the scissors, and all the discussion tonight has been along, the lines of trying to find a balance. I just wanted to raise another issue, which is, what is the situation in Russia? My own opinion on a technical point is probably a technical point. We don't want to go into a huge discussion at the moment. I don't believe that Russia is an imperialist country. I believe it is a dictatorship, a tyranny of Putin and of the Russian oligarchs. But if we're going to use the term imperialism in the sense that Lenin used it as a technical term for a particular stage of history, I think we have to look very closely at Russia. It doesn't fall into that category. Russia has it's got I'm very broad here, 150 million people. It's got approximately the same gross domestic product as Australia. Australia has 25 million or something at the moment. I'm not sure what it is. They both have around 1.8 trillion US dollars, 1.7, 1.8 trillion US dollars. Australia is a sub-imperialist country. It is completely tied in with the United States and Europe and so on. Russia, in terms of the wealth of the country and the monopoly capitalism of the country, is sort of a bit similar to Brazil, if anything, in terms of the figures. So the point about that is not to support the Russian invasion or justify it in any way. Putin is a total tyrant, and he's suppressing the democratic rights for people in the country, and he's also, of course, suppressing the people. But I think we need to sort of see what is the relationship of forces internationally on that situation. Anyway, look, that could be a whole new topic on its own. Maybe we can't resolve that question tonight. But I did want to say one more thing about Russia, and that is we haven't mentioned at this stage the fact that the political opposition in Russia is being suppressed at a massive rate. And I did want to speak up in favour of Boris Kagalitsky, who is a Marxist and has been collaborating with our party over many, many years, including visiting us. He did visit us, really? Yeah, I think so, at least once. And I think we should make a point of expressing our solidarity with people such as Boris, who has for many, many years adopted, radical positions on all sorts of issues, not only in Russia and around the world. So, okay, I've just raised a technical point, but I do want to say that we do need to mount a big campaign in solidarity with the suppression of the Russian, particularly left opposition. So that's my comment. Thank you.
I wanted to ask whether Russia had the right to protect itself from NATO, because when Russia wanted to did put missiles in Cuba, you remember the response? Still Guantanamo Bay is under United States. So if it's, for example, the Russian people wanted to put a missile in Mexico, what do you think the United States would do? That's my question.
If there's no other questions in the room, I'll hand it back, because there's no one on the chat. So I'll hand it back to Vladyslav. Just before doing that, as Jim mentioned, obviously there's topics within topics that could be entire new forums. So and it's probably unfair on us to yeah. So that's what I was going to say. So it's probably unfair to ask Vladyslav to speak for. Obviously we want him to definitely focus on Ukraine, but I'm not sure how much he can tell us about this nature of what's going on internally in Russia today. But even if Vladyslav can't answer that question, it can begin to be answered in the book. And again, I'll raise two important contributions. One by Russian political economist Ilya Matiev, who directly takes up this question of Russian imperialism. And also, given that Jim has mentioned it, there is also an interview with Boris Kagalitsky. And I think Vladyslav, in his contribution earlier, did mention about the crackdown on the anti-war left and the need for solidarity. That is certainly something that we want to be showing our support for Ukraine, and understanding that obviously the stronger the anti-war movement is in Russia, obviously the better it is for Ukrainian people. But I just did that as again for those who've come in a bit later, for another plug for the book as part of the book launch, and I'll hand it now to Vladyslav to respond to those questions, comments.
What was the second question? I forgot.
It was a short one. Did you want to just ask again, Juan? But I think it was basically about Russia's right to defend itself.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There's a bit more than that, but that was the sum of it, I think.
Yeah, and that's when Russia wanted to put missiles in Cuba, the response of the American United States government was to invade Cuba, and still have Guantanamo Bay and it's as part of the United States. So, and then I said that if Russia was to put missiles in Mexico, what do you think the United States would do?
Okay. So the problem with this thesis is that it already was done. Like US did everything to secure so-called Russian sphere of influence and Russian security, and to promote cooperation with Russian imperialist regime as partners. And practically, this proposition that you are speaking of was realized fully, and we see the result that there was war that killed more than 20% of the population of Chechen Republic. There was an invasion in Georgia, and now the 2 invasions in Ukraine. So we could see that Russia don't need too much defense, but actually countries that border Russia need actual defense from absolutely real threat of Russian invasion and Russian military buildup. And the threats of nuclear annihilation now comes exclusively from Russia. No other state in the world, well, no other Western states at least, or states that hostile to Russia, promotes the idea of nuclear annihilation and usage of nuclear weapons. It's a topic exclusively promoted by Russia. So the question, who is needing defense actually? The imperialist state that pushes further to annex countries and destroy whole nations, or the actual states who are fighting against it, who don't have nuclear weapons, who don't have huge economic potential, and whose people are just dying because of imperialist ambitions? That's a very good question. And I think that it could be really interestingly answered in discussions that were taking like 100 years ago about should UK guarantee Poland, or it would be damage interest of Third Reich. Should allies guarantee Czechoslovakia, or it also would threaten the Third Reich? I think that's the question that they absolutely should, and that's the question of international solidarity, that any nations that face imperialist aggression should be guaranteed solidarity and help and support by grassroots movements and by states. I don't think that there should be any negotiation about how we should compromise, how we should divide spheres of imperialist influence, but we should have very universal approach that countries deserve security and people deserve security. And if the security of one nation interests comes at the cost of genociding a few states, interfering in their policies, forcing them to promote some political diplomatic decisions, it doesn't mean that it is legitimate security concerns. It's imperialist concerns of sphere of influence, which is not the thing that left should promote. Yeah, and second, about analysis of imperialism, I think that everyone could just take any analysis that they want. It's not very important for me. If a person finds his aspiration in Leninist doctrine, in doctrine of any other left-wing activist, but changing the doctrine, reality doesn't change. And reality is that Russia organized imperialist and genocidal war against Ukraine. And that if you are feeling solidarity and if you're on the side of the people, on the side of democracy, human rights, and socialism, you should support Ukraine. That as simple as it is, and any theory that opposes this status is reactionary, and that's it. There's no further discussions that could take place in this. We couldn't say that okay, Russian imperialism, actually, like Gorlitsky said, it's his important thesis that Russian imperialism is progressive, so the left should support them and support all the genocidal campaigns. That was the thesis before the full-scale invasion, but he changed it not because development of Russian imperialism itself, but because of internal dictatorship that was built around Putin. But before that was the thesis in support of invasion of Chechen Republic, in support of invasion of Georgia, and in support of genocidal invasion of Ukraine in 2014. So I don't think that such theories that justifies campism and justifies support for reactionary camps and actually justifies genocide could be tolerated on the left. So because of this, it's very hard to outline Gorlitsky for Ukrainian left and support him directly. We support the release of all anti-war activists in Russia, but we don't underline Gorlitsky itself because he was agitating for destroying Ukraine. He was agitating for Russian imperialism, and he actually was, and he collaborated with Putin, and in the end, he even agitated for voting for Trump. It's not the positions that we can push, but we can push solidarity with all people who are imprisoned by Putinist regime who oppose war right now. I think it should be done, but without giving the ground to the theories that can justify genocide. So I think that's my position on this question.
I have at least one person on the chat who has a question, but I'm just conscious of time and also of Vladislav's time. So maybe I might just see if there's anyone else in the room or in the chat who wants to participate in this last round of 3. And then probably if everyone's happy with that, we might then just round it up. If Vladislav's got any, also answer those questions, but any final comments he'd like to make. I can also just make some final comments and make some announcements as well at the end. But people are happy for us to go in that direction. We've got, as I said, we've got Dick online. I'll let him speak, ask his question, and then if there's anyone else in the room, otherwise we'll let Vladislav answer, and then we can round up the meeting. So you go, Dick.
Thanks, Fred. I don't actually have a question. I just wanted to make 2 brief comments. The first is on what does the Russian opposition, anti-war opposition, call for? And what their position is they call for the removal of Russian troops. They call for the defeat of Putin. This is very important. That they call that people who had very bad positions in the past, which might include which did include Kagalitsky, it certainly includes Navalny and Kara-Murza. These people are the sort of main figureheads in the Russian opposition, and whom Putin has made sure are going to be in jail for a very long time. They've changed their positions. And the basic position in the Russian anti-war movement is defeatist. And that's very important. If the Russian anti-war movement, which is anti-Putin, pro-democracy movement, is defeatist in relation to the war, then we should take a message from that, which is we should be defeatist too. The other thing I wanted to say was, just speaking on behalf of the European Network for Solidarity with Ukraine, Putin understands his strategy is based on 2 points. The first one is to repress the opposition at home as much as possible, because he knows even though there is no mass opposition in Russia at the moment, it's all completely repressed because of the repressive legislation and because of, up to 20,000 people have been arrested ever since February 24 last year. He knows that anti-war sentiment is growing. So this is why you suddenly find a 10-year addition to the sentence for Navalny. For example, this is why Kagalitsky's been thrown into jail and will be into jail for at least 8 years, going on the charges that are being brought against him. So you've got repression at home. The other angle of attack for Putin is to develop and stimulate war weariness in Europe. They've got a big problem. Putin has a big problem in Europe, which is that majority sentiment is pro-Ukrainian. The latest Eurobarometer, which is the opinion measuring device of the European Union, shows that there's a majority in all countries except Bulgaria, Greece, and Slovakia for arming Ukraine. Arm Ukraine so it can win the war. And that sentiment is, and this is strange because it includes countries which are traditionally, pacifist or very suspicious of NATO. For example, even Spain, where we have a very strong anti-NATO sentiment going back to the Iraq War. And Portugal is 90% support for arming Ukraine. So our other job we do, the job we do in the European Network for Solidarity with Ukraine, is try and build that sentiment and make it stronger and explain exactly what is happening in Ukraine and get people like Vladislav and especially trade unionists, Ukrainian trade unionists with whom we work, to get that message across to working people in the rest of Europe. And we organise around that. In addition to that, we organise, of course, material aid to the union movement, to the feminist movement, to the environment movement in Ukraine. So just saying what we think is important, the important thing is this battle for ideas. The battle of ideas is critical. The battle for hearts and minds, just as it was in the Vietnam War in Australia, it's doubly critical here. The battle for hearts and minds in Europe and the battle to support the resistance in Russia. And the European network will strengthen its work in relation to support for solidarity with political prisoners in Russia and making people understand here how important this is, and in getting people to understand that the relationship between the democratic movement in Russia, the movement for democratic rights in Russia, especially democratic rights for the oppressed non-Slavic, non-Russian nationalities, is intimately linked to a victory for Ukraine in this war. That is very, very important to get. Anyway, I'll just leave it there. Thanks a lot, Fred.
So just one sec. There's just one in the chat, which I'm not sure if it's a question or just a comment.
Brother, can I say something?
No, hang on 1 second. Sorry. So Vladyslav is you've already got your. You could speak to that if you want, but he's in the chat. He's put a saying about the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in a petition. So I'll let Vladyslav speak to that. As I said, we were going to finish up the meeting just because of time. I know that 2 people have asked, who have already asked questions, that wanted to say something. I will allow it, but I just will ask them to just be short. Like I said, you had a go, and it just in terms of trying to round up the meeting in a time that's reasonable for everyone else. So, yep, and then yourself, and then I'll let Vladyslav respond and speak to the petition.
Yeah, quickly. I think this is just military madness. But what you were saying is just arm Ukraine, and beat it until they win. You're up against a mighty enemy here, the Russian. It's right up against their border. Nuclear arm, the second largest nuclear weapon. This is crazy. You've got to think politically. And this military solution, a pure military solution, like Nick is talking about, to me, is crazy, especially for the left. We want a world of peace. And Russia is wrong. There's absolutely no guarantee Russia should get out. But the main thing is we've got to force Biden and company to at least think about negotiation on the basis of a peaceful area for the Ukrainians in the area.
Okay. And then, yep. Again, can we just be quick?
Just like I don't want to give like any bad impression, we are all supporting people in Ukraine, but not the government. We support the peace. We don't want war. It's like I'm Palestinian, and I can feel like what's mean like there is like millions of refugees for Ukraine outside. There is hospital is full, and people are sleeping with scare. This need to be end. This is not their war. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Vladyslav, I'll hand it back to you. As I said, if you want to address, none of those last 3 were really questions, but you may want to comment on them. But also, if you want to make any final comments as well, you're more than welcome to. And then after that, I'll round up the discussion and bring the meeting to an end. So,
yeah, I would say that it is not position of the left to surrender, absolutely not, and to surrender your rights without a fight. It's not what the left stand for, and left never stand for it. In fact, probably if you organize sometimes, well, at least once in your time, for example, on your workplace, you understand that to negotiate with the boss who has intrinsically more power than you need to unite, and you need to have negotiating power. You need to force boss to negotiate with you. Or if you just surrender and say, please be, I don't know, be good to us, no, nothing good will happen. You need the power to force person to negotiate with you. The same goes with the war. You cannot just say to imperialist genocidal state, please good with us. Jews couldn't say for the Reich, please be good with us. Let's negotiate some common ground, because there is non-common ground in this position. The same goes here. So, as previous speaker said, arm Ukraine until it wins. I really like the slogan. And I think it's good, and I'm really happy that you repeated it a few times, even in the opposition. But yes, or arm Ukraine until it wins. No surrender, no surrendering your rights, not surrendering human rights, not surrendering to genocide without a fight. It's the very left-wing position that we need to fight for our rights. We need to defend them, and we need to stay for them strong. Because if we just give our rights without a fight, nothing would come on from this. We just would live in perpetual slavery. perpetual slavery and perpetual imperialism. It's not the future that they want. It's not, I think, the future that you want. But for some reason, you are agitating for this. And I don't think that it is a solution. I think the solution should be that people should defend themselves and not just let be killed, not just let be occupied, not just let other people to get their lands. It wasn't the position of the left in Second World War. It wasn't the position of the left about Palestine freedom. It wasn't the position of the left on any struggle, because the left is about struggle. The left is about democratic struggle, about socialist struggle, and not about surrendering. Surrendering for some abstract ideas of peace. And I think that we should be focused on what makes us the left. And it's solidarity, it's human rights, it's democracy, it's value of human life and human creativity, freedom of nations, cooperation, self-governance. And none of this could happen if we just compromise always or surrender to imperialism. So as the meeting was started with the need for the left be conscious about anti-colonialism, firstly about indigenous people, about the land, about the land being stolen, and about opposing all imperialisms. I think it would be great to end on this note that the left should always oppose all imperialisms. The left always should be for the people. The left always should be against land grabbing and stealing. The left should be always against destruction of indigenous people and assimilation. And left, it is what makes the left. Because without this, left wouldn't have any ideals. It wouldn't be nothing. It would be just far-right party. It would be AfD if you want to talk about only social benefits and that's it. And the ideals and human rights and democracy is precisely what makes left the left. So I think that's absurd thing to agitate. And well, having possibility right now, I want to also promote a petition organized by Denis Bonder, who unfortunately isn't presented today because of him being busy. He wrote together with American socialists a petition about the threat of nuclear blackmailing that is done by Russia. Right now, Russia has the possibility to blow up nuclear power plant in any moment, and there are explosive devices placed in the nuclear power plant, and also supplies and munitions which are saved there, so Ukrainians wouldn't attack them. And it's really important point that if Ukraine succeeds in its counteroffensive, or even if Russia will feel weakened in their imperialist ambitions, they could blow up the nuclear power plant and create the catastrophe that would be a lot more dangerous than Chernobyl was. And for this, I ask everyone to just get to know and sign the petitions that are in the chat. And I hope that to the people who are presented offline, that you could redistribute the link, because it is a really important topic. And also one of the points of international solidarity, how the left could help Ukraine, is to put pressure on international structures to organize monitoring or even UN mission to the nuclear power plant to prevent possible huge catastrophe. So thank you for this.
No, thank you, Vladyslav, for your presentation, for answering the questions, the variety of different questions posed today as part of this public forum and book launch. And we'll definitely do our best to promote that petition. Might try and get back in touch with Dennis to see maybe we can collaborate on something for Green Left. And we'll also make sure to share around the article that he wrote not that long ago with a few others for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists dealing particularly with this issue. So it is obviously of great concern, the largest nuclear plant in Europe, which is, potentially in the midst of, being destroyed amongst the war, and what the catastrophe that could entail would be, is something that should concern us all. And I think in many ways, and to sort of, I guess, bring today's meeting to an end, I think that is why there is so many different discussions and debates and thinking through that's occurring I'm very grateful that someone could take their time out from Ukraine to provide their viewpoint as well, because obviously, stuck here in Australia, we're trying to grapple with what does this mean for what we're doing here, particularly in the context where our government actually it's not too phased about Russia and Ukraine. It's China. It's got its side on, and how do we deal with this world where really has changed in the last 10, 20 years. It's not the same world that we were living in back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's a world that's increasingly moving towards greater tensions, heightened rivalry between great powers, where threats of war that previously seemed unthinkable, are things that are being discussed as we're discussing here, and how do we deal with all that? Well, as my little grain of sand of that contribution of that discussion is that I think in every box that we can think of, Putin's war on Ukraine has made everything worse. If we want to talk about expansion of NATO, no one has done more to expand NATO than Putin has done. If we want to talk about the threat of missiles and nuclear weapons, no one has done more than what the Putin regime has done. What do we need to do in that context is, well, we need to express our solidarity with those that are resisting that on the ground floor. That doesn't mean, at least in my opinion, what we do here in Australia, with the question that was raised about negotiations. And this is a question that asked, for instance, Howie Hawkins from the US. And what do they think about negotiating? Well, they said, we want to push the US government to negotiate on the international treaties on nuclear weapons. That's the kind of negotiations that should be happening, but not negotiations that say, well, Ukrainians should have to give up, this part of their land, or give up this part of their people, or give up this part of their constitution just for the rest of us, which I think, as Vladyslav has outlined in history, has shown really to just be the step before the next the next war, because that's already been tried. So I think trying to think about how we do that here in Australia, I think is vital. How we push our government to be part of these international conventions, to end nuclear weapons, interballistic missiles, a whole bunch of treaties, some of which Australia is a signatory, others that they're not even a treaty to. But at the same time, how we continue to express our solidarity with those fighting imperialism everywhere, whether that be against our own imperialist government or against other imperialist governments, or if you don't want to use the word imperialist, at least if you prefer genocidal, we can call them that. But either way, that we want to be expressing that anti-imperialist, anti-colonial solidarity. That's, I think, a large part of what we try to reflect in the book. Those visions, but also those debates that are occurring, and hopefully that's encouraged people to want to get a copy. I'm just going to, Jim's got it at the back, so if you're in the room, you can buy them. I just also quickly use the opportunity just to announce there's a couple of events, Radical Woolloomooloo walking tour that's happening on Sunday, September 3. The following day, Disruption to End Climate Destruction, that's happening at Redfern Town Hall. And then the following day, so if you really want to get 3 days of political activity, September 3, September 4, and then September 5, the Palestinian Catastrophe, which is a public forum happening at Sydney Uni. You can get more information for that at the table. But just want to ask maybe just one last time, just to give Vladyslav a round of applause.